have read this already in chapter 1, verses 14 through 25, which, Elohim is talking about the luminaries in the atmosphere, and this is the second of the 3 set of creation days. You know how we had the first set of 3 days where he was dividing, and now he's filling. Dividing and filling, okay? So the first, do you want me to just go ahead and read through this really quick? I think I'll go ahead and do that, just because it will help us to kind of get the context here. So Genesis 1, 14 through 25 says, "And saying is Elohim, become shall luminaries in the atmosphere of the heavens to give light on the earth, to separate between the day and the night. And they come to be for signs and for appointments and for days and years. And there came to be luminaries in the atmosphere of the heavens to give light on the earth. And coming is it to be so. And making is Elohim 2 great luminaries, the greater luminary for ruling the day, and the smaller luminary for ruling the night, and the stars. And bestowing them is Elohim in the atmosphere of the heavens to give light on the earth, and to rule in the day and in the night, and to separate between the light and the darkness. And seeing is Elohim that it is good. And coming is it to be evening, and coming to be morning, the 4th day. And saying is Elohim, teem shall the water with the teeming living soul, and the flyer shall fly over the earth on the space of the atmosphere of the heavens. And coming is it to be so. And creating is Elohim great monsters of the sea, and every living moving soul with which the water teems for their from kind, and every winged flyer for its from kind. And seeing is Elohim that it is good. And blessing them is Elohim, saying, be fruitful, and increase, and fill the water of the seas. And the flyer is to be increasing in the earth. And coming is it to be evening, and coming to be morning, the 5th day. And saying is Elohim, bring forth shall the earth the living soul for its from kind, beast and moving animal, and land life for its from kind. And coming is it to be so. And making is Elohim the land life for its from kind. And Elohim saw that it was good. Is that where I left off? And saying is Elohim, verse 26, make will we humanity in our image, and according to our likeness, and they shall sway over the fish of the sea, and over the flyer of the heavens, and over the beast, and over all land life, and over every moving animal living on the land. And creating is Elohim humanity in his image. In the image of Elohim he creates it. Male and female he creates them. And blessing them is Elohim. And saying to them, Izzy, be fruitful and increase, and fill the earth and subdue it, and sway over the fish of the sea, and over the flyer of the heavens, and over the beast, and over all of the earth, and over all life moving on the land. And saying is Elohim, behold, I give to you all herbage seeding seed, which is on the surface of the entire earth, and every tree which has in it the fruit of a tree seeding seed. For you it is coming to be for food, and for all land life, and for every flyer of the heavens, and for every moving animal on the land which has in it a living soul. All green herbage is for food, and coming is it to be so. And seeing is Elohim all that he had made, and behold, it is very good. And coming is it to be evening, and coming to be morning, the 6th day. There we have... Was someone here?
My brother.
Oh, your brother. Oh, okay. There we have the 6 days of creation. Now, of course, the 7th day will come in the 2nd chapter. But what I want to do is ask you a couple of questions. What do you see that the second set of 3 days of creation have in common, and how are they different? Because we did that discussion with the first 3 days, and we noted some very interesting similarities and differences. And I'd like for you to take a look at the second 3 days and see what similarities and differences you see there. Don't all start talking at once now. We've got to be orderly.
Well, there's 2 things. Seem to be, I don't know, maybe not 2 things, but man and beast and birds and fish, so maybe there's...
The moon and the sun.
Yeah.
It's an interesting idea about kind of pairs of things, perhaps, coming in twos. Excuse me?
Did you already talk about
I just noted in passing that in the first 3 days that he was dividing, and then in the second 3 days he is filling. Do you see?
Looks like they correspond. The 4th day is filling what was made on the
That's kind of like
It's
it's not exactly a chiastic structure, is it? But it definitely seems to correlate that the first and the fifth and the second, that they're kind of moving in those groups. Tracy, were you saying something? I apologize. No? Okay. So yeah, that definitely seems, huh? Jerry, sorry.
I was going to say, on the fifth day, he filled the sea and he filled the air,
Right,
fish and birds. On the sixth day, he filled the land
right.
with mammals, reptiles, this kind of stuff. But all 3 days, everything that was created had blood. They breathed oxygen. They moved. They walked. They flew. They swam. They moved around.
Yeah.
But on the first 3 days, everything was stationary.
That's an interesting idea. Now, those of you who might have taken a look at Holyssa Alewine's Creation Gospel series might gain some insight or remember some of the insights that she had regarding these 6 days of creation and division and filling, and the rapidly swarming, teeming life that is happening, that has something to do with the Hebrew word that it means to run, to moving the feet rapidly. You can see that we had previously talked about how the 6 days of creation also seem to have a corollary in the spiritual life of a person as they move through the redemptive process, and also had begun to notice some similarities and maybe some connections between the 7 Moedim and the 7 days, the 6 days of creation, the 7th day of rest. What do you note in regard to these days that might connect to either the concept of a spiritual growth of the individual, or those Moedim? I know that Angela and Tracy were talking about some of those connections. Did you see anything interesting there?
Anywhere, Tracy?
I've got some thoughts, but no, not really. But we talked about the 4th day last week, so I don't want to.
The 4th day was okay, and that was related to Shavuot somehow with the
Message from above.
Yeah, it's an interesting concept. It's an interesting concept, and I think it holds some validity. I think that you guys came into some trouble looking at the 5th day and trying to coordinate that with the Day of Atonement. Is that right?
No, 5th day would be trumpets.
Trumpets, excuse me.
Yeah.
Which makes sense because it's a mystery day. So.
Yeah.
Is the 5th day a mystery day?
The day that no one knows.
I found one thing that could be or could not be related.
All right, let's hear it.
We talked before about, besides parables and the day that no man knows, and relating to that day of trumpets, Yom Teruah.
Uh-huh.
In Ecclesiastes 9:12, I found a scripture that seems to talk about that day, the day that comes suddenly with like a thief kind of thing, mentioning birds and fish. So I don't know if it's related or not, but it's Ecclesiastes 9:12. It says, "For man also knows not his time, as the fishes that are taken in an evil net, and as the birds that are caught in a snare, so are the sons of men snared in an evil time when it falls suddenly upon them." So I see it could be some kind of relation there to the birds and fish.
It's interesting that it relates to birds and fish, yeah.
And this day that falls suddenly.
We're looking too at Noah, because that's when you have, that was when the earth, there's no more land, there's only water and sky, that's what he was filling on day 5.
Right.
Birds and fish.
Right.
And the idea that, the blowing of the trumpet, wind.
The wind, yeah.
And then maybe that somehow relates to the gathering of his people, because it's the last trumpet.
Yeah. Yeah, I know that's a challenging one to see. Dan, did you see anything in relation to the 6th day? And that would relate to which feast?
Atonement.
Atonement. Okay, how
that
so?
That one I think relates, in my mind anyway. As it's a big, long trail, but basically that parable Messiah tells about separating the sheep from the goats can be traced back to Isaiah 58, and the verbiage is the same, and it seems to match the Day of Atonement, this Day of Judgment, where he's sitting in judgment and separating sheep on the right, goats on the left. So in my mind, I'm thinking about this as he creates man and beast. He creates man in his image. Beast is a mark of the beast that we hear about in Revelation. So could this be kind of a picture of the Day of Atonement? You're either in the image of God or in the image of the beast.
I think that's maybe not an entirely invalid idea. You can see that I think there's entirely valid reasons to associate a beast with, you can see that, for example, like Esau, was a man of the field, and he seemed kind of like a beast. He liked to roam with the beasts, and he felt an affinity with the beasts.
Very hairy.
And he was also hairy. So, I think that associating beasts with remember also that John and Yeshua would talk about the minions of our adversary as brood of vipers. Those are beasts. Okay, so children of light versus the beasts, so to speak. And I think that there's every reason to kind of see that delineation on day 6 of beasts and man, and that they are. Now, it does not say, but were the beasts created in the same way as the man? Doesn't seem to be.
The earth bring forth.
Yeah, the earth bring forth. Now, does that? You're not given explicitly God shaped it and molded it out of the the ground. The Adama. That doesn't seem to be the case. But even if it was, even if you wanted to make the case that the beasts were molded, the earth brought them forth out of dirt or something like that. What's the key difference there?
I think that the beasts have the physical, the flesh, and the soul, which is the nephesh.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But they weren't breathed into, they don't have the
Spirit.
spirit.
The ruach,
the
yeah.
third part.
Right. Yes, that's a good point. Good point.
So yeah, I think also that day 6 indeed is, as it is in chapter 1, is only the spiritual part of humans, not the physical part.
Yeah, and I think, when we get to this next section where it shows God actually creating man and how he did it and breathed into his nostrils, I will talk about that in a little bit more depth, because I think there's some, really key insights there that would help us. Now, you notice that this says that humanity is like Elohim, and that he is created in Elohim's image and likeness. What do you note? In what ways is humanity like Elohim, and what is the difference between Elohim's image and his likeness? You notice that those are two entirely different Hebrew words there, image and likeness. There's also a bit of a mystery there, because he talks about making man in his image, but he never mentions the word likeness again. It's kind of a curious thing. John?
No, I think once again that he is created in the spiritual form, in the spirit. That's where the animals were already there. At least that's how I envision it with plants and animals, but the man was still in the spiritual form, and because the Elohim are in the spiritual form, so he's still in the same non-form.
I see. Okay. So in what way would you say that man is like God? And further, to further that idea.
The spirit.
He's a spiritual being. He has the breath of the spirit of life in him. This is a key thing. Tracy?
This may sound strange, but that word likeness reminds me of parables. It's like we're a parable of the spiritual, like a walking parable.
Yeah, that's a really keen insight, and I think that Holyssa Elwine also talked about the human body as being a parable of God, and it reflects God. Hold that thought for just a moment, because I think that would be more appropriately connected to when he talks about how he created him and breathed into him and stuff. And I want to go kind of deep into that and talk about that a little more. Jerry?
One of the things that we have is free will. God has free will.
Yes.
The angels, Satan, a whole bunch of them, they all had free will.
Yeah.
So that was the stickler that messed everything up.
Yeah, that's a good point. Doesn't the New Testament say that we are slaves to sin? And that once we've been freed from sin, we are now slaves to righteousness? So who has free will?
Well,
I'm sorry. I'm just throwing that out there.
But you still have the
the
flesh.
choice to which way you want to go. Whether you want to be a slave to this one or a slave to that one.
It's a good idea. I like your word potential. I think that's a good word that you might.
I was thinking about this actually when Eve, the first human, when she ate from the tree of good and evil. From that point on, every single human would now know good and evil. And I wonder, if she never would have eaten the fruit, of course, all of us probably wonder
Somebody
that.
would have.
Somebody would have, yeah.
Yeah. And then, of course, God didn't let them eat from the tree of life, or they would have lived forever. Right? I also find interesting is I'll point out to religious people who don't want to give Jesus his deity. And I'll say, if you notice in Genesis, it says in our, not in mine. And I emphasize that. And they don't usually know what to say. I'm like, he wasn't talking to the angels, was he?
No, the images that I've seen of angels in the Bible don't look anything like a human. You got wheels and 6 wings and.
Yeah. So that's interesting too. When I pose that question to other religions that don't believe Christ is the Messiah, I'm like, right here in Genesis, who is it talking about? Who is our image? Mm-hmm. That's plural. It's not one.
Yeah.
So it have to be God the Father and Jesus the Son.
Yeah, I
They
think
don't
that's.
usually have a response to that. So if you ever come across that, you may want to try that first.
No, I totally agree. And I mean, even in the rabbinic writings, they tell you pretty clearly that the Messiah was involved in the creation of the world. So he was there in the beginning.
And that's what John 1, chapter 1 is all
Yes.
about.
John 1:1
Exactly.
says the same thing, absolutely.
And the Aleph Tav in Genesis 1:1.
Right, absolutely. Gee?
What you were saying a little while ago about free will, that slave of righteousness, is I'm thinking of where the verse is about we can only serve one master. We get to choose which master,
Yeah,
so that's where our free will is.
right.
But we can choose to serve.
You're going to serve someone, as Bob Dylan would
We
say.
We're going to serve someone.
Yeah.
That's right. Grace.
Somewhere tied in that is a conscience.
Is what?
A conscience.
A conscience that Paul talks about in Romans. Yes,
Yes.
absolutely. Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, it's all tied together for sure. Yeah, absolutely. So the authority that man is given over the earth, what is that authority? It says that he shall sway or exercise some type of authority over the man and over the beasts and the fish and the fowl and everything like that. What is that authority exactly? How would a man exercise that authority? And how does that authority translate into him being like God?
Well, that's basically right.
He gives his authority.
The text is that's the correlation between God and man, is because God made man higher than the beasts, and the beasts are there to serve man, and God is created above men, and men serve. So you've got the relationship, and so he's showing us through his creation that just as I put you above, I'm above, and this is the order of things, so that we can understand that order.
And God is a God of order.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Tracy?
And also to care for his creation. He's putting you in charge of something because he is entrusting his world and his belongings to you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that being a good steward of the planet, of the earth, of its creatures, of its plants, is commanded. This is a commandment. He says, he doesn't say, hey, if you wouldn't mind, take care of these things. He actually gives them a commandment. You shall rule over these things. Rule in benevolence. So don't go to some continent and chop down all the trees and devastate the land. In fact, he tells you explicitly, you shall not chop down the fruit trees if you're besieging your enemy or something like that. The trees haven't done anything to you. If you need to build siege platforms and battering rams, you can cut down trees that don't bear fruit. So that's given in the Torah. And so we are definitely, now I think that obviously people can, just like anything can be corrupted by the adversary, has been or will be, you can cross over into being a good steward, into being a worshiper of the earth and its creatures. You can see it in the environmental movement today, where people believe that animals and plants are more important than humans. That we need to depopulate the planet to make more room for plants and animals and stuff like that. So you can take ideas, anything that God has created or commanded can be and will be destroyed, twisted, perverted to serve the enemy's goals, always.
In Romans, people hear the truth to worship the reptiles, the birds. I forgot what it says exactly, but
yeah, absolutely. They worship the creature instead of the creator. Yeah, Jerry.
Somewhere in the Bible talks about if you know the beginning, you know the end, or the end from the beginning, or something like that. Anyways, God, the great king, made Adam the lesser king of the earth. He lost it to Satan. 6,000 years later, God is going to make his son the vassal king of the earth. God the Father will still be the great king of the universe, but his son is going to be the representative of the king of the earth, just like Adam was.
Sure.
5,000, 6,000 years ago, whenever it was.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
So
When
it's
it talks about the first man Adam and Messiah being the last man. First is the son of natural body, and second is the spiritual body.
Good insight. Well, and it says in the book of the Revelation at the end that after the Messiah has his millennial kingdom, that he hands the kingdom back to his Father. He steps down to allow his Father to rule, which is a curious concept to a lot of Christians that I don't know that they know what to do with that exactly. It's like, you mean Jesus is going to step down and give authority to his Father? Well, that shouldn't surprise you. He gave all authority and glory to his Father when he was on the earth.
Right.
So why would he not do so in the heavenly kingdom as well? Now, does that relegate him to non-existence or non-importance? Of course not. But he always points to the Father. Keith?
Right, that's relating to the 8th day, the new beginning, where we start over again.
Yeah, I think that holds spiritual significance, absolutely. Like the 8th day of the Feast of Sukkot, for example, which is kind of a mysterious day. Wait a minute, on the 8th day, that's a little bit strange. Yeah, absolutely. Did someone else have a comment? No?
What about the authority to name all of these creatures?
That is an excellent insight. About authority of naming the creatures, and that's coming up in the next section. But we can deal with that now, because I don't know that I put a question about that. But that's a good point. You know that, especially in Hebrew, names mean things.
Yes.
And a name of a thing really denotes, I think, in a lot of instances, its character, its nature. This brings a funny story to my mind as I was talking with Evan the other day, and he was like wanting to know what different people's names meant, and it's like, well, Evan in Hebrew is stone. He's like, well, what's Hayden? I said, I don't know that Hayden is actually a derivative of a Hebrew name, and he said, well, let's look it up. So we looked it up, and the first site that we saw said Hayden meant heathen. He was like, oh, that's not good. I said, no. Yeah, heathen. And he's like, no, I don't know. But all of the other sites said it just means a grassy field. And I thought, well, that's better than heathen. So, yeah. But names do mean things, and I think that it wasn't. I don't think that Adam, in my imagination, and this is just my imagination, I don't think that Adam was just coming up with stuff off the top of his head and saying, "Oh, monkey," you know. I think that if you maybe had access to like the Hebrew names for these animals or something, that you would be able to see in the name something that is a characteristic of that animal that really defines it and gives its characteristics and its meaning, maybe even a spiritual meaning or significance in some way. So, good point.
What's interesting is if you go to the Paleo Hebrew and you go to the 3-letter roots, a lot of the times, if you look at it in the Paleo, it's amazing. You'll look at what each letter represents, and it'll perfectly describe what the word is.
Yeah,
it's amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. So that goes right to, you know, a name for something, and that's what's neat about the Hebrew language, especially with the Paleo and the 3-letter roots, is that I was stunned when I saw that, because English is not like that at all. There's no other language that I'm aware of that is like that, where each letter has its own meaning, and you combine these 3-letter roots to create an idea which really houses within it the naming and identification of the object that it's describing, or the thought, or the feeling, or the thing, you know, the noun and verb, the pronoun, whatever. It just works every time, and it's very strange. It's not strange, it's divine.
The roots for likeness and image are pretty profound if you look at those. I don't know what you found. You said image was different.
I wasn't going to go into that too deeply. If you have some thoughts that you'd like to share, I was just going to point that out to you for maybe to put in your notes to take a look at those Hebrew words. I think one is zelam and one is demut. Yeah. What do you see there, Mike, that's kind of interesting?
In demut, it's door to the waters and the covenant.
Interesting. That now that is a. How would you make a connection? Or could you? It might be difficult. I know that it was difficult for me.
Well, if the likeness of God is to access that door, which is, you know, debar or word, right? And waters represent nations, but it also represents the word.
Yeah.
And then the tav as the covenant. I think that falling into his likeness, you have to go through that door.
Good point. And how about zelam? What do you see regarding zelam?
That one was similar. It is the desire to lead the waters.
Interesting. So the desire to lead the waters in some way, which is a very curious thing, especially as it's related to the topic of him swaying over the fields and the birds and the beasts and stuff like that. It's like that the zelam and the demut really do seem to tie in to being in the characteristic of God. It's a curious thing, and I would just encourage you to, you know, make a note of those Hebrew words and kind of look at what they mean in different sections and kind of see there's something hidden there. I'm not exactly sure what it is, but I'm convinced that there's something more there that could be studied out and fleshed out a little bit.
It's also interesting that it is, they say your phantom or illusion, resemblance.
Yeah.
With like a phantom body, they always call about it. Also, like after an amputation, you know.
Oh, like a phantom leg or something. Yeah. That's an interesting insight, you know, and I think that let's deal with that in just a second here, because we're going to hit that kind of hard when we talk about the man being created. Grace?
Where are these words you're talking about?
In his image and likeness.
26.
What verse?
26. Our image and according to our likeness. That's zelam and demut. So just make note of those words and look at where you find them in the text in various places and what they mean and how does that relate between God and man. I think it's an interesting thing that bears more study, that you might find some interesting things there. Now, in regards to this first commandment, what is the first commandment? Go forth and multiply. That is the first commandment that God gives to the man. Go forth and multiply. In fact, it seems like it's commanded to all of, by implication, it seems, that all the creatures. Because let them teem, they're going to produce after like kind. They will do that by instinct. because it's instinctual to their nature of being an instinctual, beastly creature that is mostly driven by fleshly desires. It is their desire, and I think that this bears keeping in mind as we move to the next section, is that the beast is driven by desire, fleshly desires. Eat, sleep, reproduce, defecate, urinate, sleep. These are the things that beasts do. And those are pretty much the only things that beasts do. Aside from run, So, bite, yeah, attack.
In yours it says go forth, right? And mine says fruitful, and it's interesting, para, that is also bring forth fruit. So we have to bring forth fruit. I thought it was nice as well.
Spiritual fruit.
Same time, also back in the New Testament.
Yeah, yeah.
And I think that multiplies the believers. Right?
Yes.
It's our fruit that they see and respond to.
Yeah,
Not
absolutely.
theology.
Right. Good point.
How they know us.
Good point. I think that Grant Luton's mom used to tell him when he was a boy, go and proclaim to the world the gospel of the kingdom and the salvation of Yeshua, and only use your words if necessary. I thought that was good advice. Tracy?
I think there's some kind of connection here that's pretty cool, is that this being made in his image, and Colossians 1:15 all talks about who is made in the image of God, but the firstborn of all creation. I think that's a reference to Messiah.
Yeah,
as the
yeah.
firstborn of all creation. And after he rose from the dead, he came to his disciples and says, all power or authority has been given to me in heaven and in earth. And then he tells them, go therefore and make disciples. So he's like saying, be fruitful and multiply,
Yeah.
basically.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think that's pretty cool.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's good insight. Does anyone else have anything that they'd like to comment on in regards to this section? I think that we are prepared to move to chapter 2. Huzzah. Okay, cool. I'm going to move forward just a little bit to chapter 2, and we're going to look at verses 1 through 15. Chapter 2, Genesis chapter 2. And finished are the heavens and the earth and all of their host, and finishing is Elohim on the sixth day, his work which he does, and ceasing is he on the seventh day from all his work which he does. And blessing is Elohim the seventh day, and making it sacred, and for in it he ceases from all his work which Elohim creates to make. These are the genealogical annals of the heavens and the earth when they were created. In the day Yehovah Elohim made the heavens and the earth, and every shrub of the field before it is coming to be in the earth, and all herbage of the field before it is sprouting. At that time Yehovah Elohim does not bring rain on the earth, and there is no human to serve the ground. Yet humidity is rising or ascending from the earth and irrigating all the surface of the ground. And forming is Yahweh Elohim the human of soil from the ground, and he is breathing into his nostrils the spirit of the living, and coming is the human, and becoming is the human a living soul, a nefesh chai. And planting is Yahweh Elohim in a garden in Eden in the east, and he is placing there the human whom he forms. And furthermore, sprouting is Yehovah Elohim from the ground every tree coveted by the sight and good for food, and the tree of the living in the midst of the garden, and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And a stream is faring forth from Eden to irrigate the garden, and from thence it is being parted and comes to four heads. The name of the one is Pishon. It is that surrounding the entire land of Havilah, where there is gold, and the gold of that land is exceedingly good. There is the pearl and the onyx stone. The name of the second stream is Gihon. It is that surrounding the entire land of Cush. And the name of the third stream is Hiddekel. It is that going east of Assyria. And the fourth stream, it is the Euphrates. Curious stuff here. And we'll talk about this. This is kind of interesting stuff. Now, the first thing on our list of topics for discussion here is Genesis 1 Genesis 2, 1 through 3, which is talking about the Sabbath day, where Elohim ceases from all of his creating work and rests on the seventh day and makes it sacred. Why, I know that this is not, any big news to any of you, but why is the observance of Shabbat so significant, and what does it mean to observe Shabbat? I know that there are lots and lots of scriptures that you probably know and that you'll bring forth, but why is it significant and why is it important to observe Shabbat?
I think one of the things is that it shows the world who we're following, who we're worshiping, who our God is.
It's a good point.
It's
He
the sign.
many times talks about it being a sign. This is a sign between me and my people, is observing Shabbat. Absolutely. What is it? And Grace, you kind of touched on this, and I think maybe we could talk about that a little bit more, that it indicates who you're serving. That's a good point. The sign of this covenant that you have with God is that you observe his Shabbat. So, a sign to whom? To the nations. Okay. Is it a sign between you and God himself?
Yeah.
That God himself will maybe recognize you and say, oh, that's one of mine. He's observing that part of my covenant.
We're saying we will do homage to him and do everything that he tells us to do. He's saying he will protect us and bless us based on whether we said we do.
That's a good point. Jerry?
I always looked at it like when you take out a loan, sign a document, you sign your name to it. The fourth commandment is God signing his name to his word.
Interesting.
That's his signature. That's his signature song, sign, whatever you want to call it.
Sure. Absolutely.
And when we obey it, we're acknowledging who he is. He's the creator. Satan don't want anybody to know that.
That's true. How would you relate Shabbat to work? Because the Shabbat is always connected to work. In what ways would you connect Shabbat to work?
Righteous work.
Okay, righteous work, that's a good insight. What about just physical work and labor and what you do to earn money? How is that related? Grace?
That's for our physical well-being. Spending the time worshiping the Lord and setting aside a day for him is the spiritual side of it.
Okay.
Well, goodness,
Excellent.
you need a break physically anyway. If you're working every day, and then if you're making money, I'm just talking in the natural sense of this.
Sure.
Well, you got to have a day to go, take care of things. So
I think that's a good insight. And there's no reason not to bring in the temporal aspects of the Sabbath, which is to, get some rest. That's certain, nothing wrong with that. Gene?
Well, when we see in Leviticus 23, it's listed with the Moedim, and it's representative of the millennium. So it's a rehearsal, and so it's important that we observe it, obviously, because it even says that if you don't, you're cut off. So when it says cut off, it's something to pay attention to.
Yeah, being cut off does not sound good in any sense. And if you look at the text of the Hebrew when it talks about being cut off and how that works, that is a frightening frightening idea. Being cut off from his people. And you can see in Exodus where that one dude decides he's going to go collect some firewood on Shabbat. He is killed. That's this is one of those Torah commandments which brings with it the death penalty. So not only is it a sign between himself and his people, it brings with it a severe punishment if it is not observed. And I think that, frankly, why didn't that dude who was collecting sticks on the Sabbath, why didn't they just have him go to the Mishkan or the tabernacle and make an offering?
Smart.
What's that?
It's always the heart.
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, it's the heart, and frankly, there's not an offering you can make in the temple for a willful, rebellious sin that brings with it the death penalty. That's not how it's set up. So, the fact that the Shabbat is emphasized so much throughout not only the Torah, but the prophets and the writings, and even in the New Testament. It's just, it's so critical. And I think that it is absolutely related to your work. Because it says, 6 days you shall work, and on the seventh day you shall rest. And I've said this to you before, that is not a suggestion. You don't suggest that you work for 6 days. He says you shall work for 6 days. If you don't work, Paul says, you shall not eat. So we have to work. And we have to stop working on the seventh day. And I know that when I first began to learn about the validity of the Sabbath, that I was in real estate. And I was, hot and heavy working it, And and I know that the Sabbath day is a big day for real estate.
Weekends. Yeah.
Weekends are huge for real estate. So I had to start to tell anyone who wanted to buy or sell a piece of property, and they asked to do it on the Sabbath day, I had to say, I'm booked.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And you know what? That people told me that you're absolutely crazy. That's how you can't make a living in real estate by taking off Saturday. That's not gonna work. But it did work, and it worked fine because He is faithful and He is true to His promises. That you shall take this day off, and I will bless you.
And that's part of the sign.
That's a good indication. Yeah, that's part of the
It's
sign.
been shown time and time again that people that honor the Sabbath, they get more done in the 6 days than they ever would in the Sabbath.
I can tell you that that's absolutely observable in my own life. It seemed to me, and it still does to this day, that whenever I started to observe the Shabbat, now of course now that I am doing a new business, most of my clients are not working on Sunday, and so there's not a lot to do in that day. But I still work. I'll work on projects that I have. I can't reach out and talk to them and communicate and plan and do all the things that I need to do because they're closed on Sunday, but I still work on Sunday because I'm commanded to. And I don't work on Saturday because I'm commanded not to. And that has been evidenced time and time again in my own life that I've received blessing for that. And also, it seems to me, since I used to take off both Saturday and Sunday, when I started to only take off Saturday and work Sunday, my weekends seemed longer and I was more rested. I don't know how that works.
Right.
It doesn't make any sense to me, but it did.
Mm-hmm.
I was more rested and my weekend just seemed to drag. Just like on and on. It's not like I was saying, hey, when is the Sabbath going to be over so I could buy and sell? It wasn't like that. It was like, this is just, I'm enjoying myself. It took me a while to learn because I was not used to being still.
Mm-hmm.
That is not something that we are used to, is ceasing from our labors. We are go, go, go. Jamelia?
Me. I was going to say, when I had my salon, I was closed Saturday and Sunday. I did not work Saturday and Sunday because every same thing. Everyone told me, "Oh my gosh, there's no way." And at first, my clients were a little taken back, but you know what? I work sometimes till 11 o'clock at night to get them in during the week. And after a while, they just go, "Man, I think that's so cool. You're not open on Saturday because now I can go do their errands because they worked all week,
Sure.
and knowing that I was there in the evening."
Yeah.
To do them during the week, but it worked out. But I never lost one client,
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
you know, because of it. So
Absolutely. Good insight. Two people had their hands up over here. Grace?
Before we ever knew about the Sabbath being that God didn't change his mind,
Yeah.
we kept Sunday.
Mm-hmm.
We never kept it properly. If they wanted to call it that, we even had youth pastors who had to do anything that they had to do on Sunday morning so that they could leave partway through the Sunday morning service to take their kids to their basketball practice and stuff.
Sure.
I mean, and on Super Bowl Sunday, everybody gets out of church Sunday evening if they even have the service.
Yeah.
They have it a little bit earlier and everybody goes home,
Yeah.
It's not.
Right.
It's not what God intended.
Yeah, Sunday, this traditional Sunday thing, whatever that was not a Sabbath. It wasn't a Sabbath in a literal sense, and it really wasn't a Sabbath in a spiritual sense either, because you're still engaged. Most people that I knew were still engaged in commerce, and they'd have no problem, get out of church and come home and change your clothes and mow the yard and, trim the bushes and do this kind of stuff. So in no sense really was it a Sabbath.
Right.
So.
But now, and I thought about this, about people that, let's say they have to work on the weekend.
Mm-hmm.
If the person or family wants to make the Sabbath a Wednesday, let's say. But, and again, I've heard different debates on this. I'm not totally sure all the time. Because I think, again, God's looking at the person's heart. If the family or the person truly has no choice, they have to work Saturday and Sunday, but they say, Lord, I'm going to dedicate Wednesday to you as a Sabbath. What do you think about that? And then, of course, if you read Mark, where Yeshua talks about the Sabbath, it was made, and again, was man made for the Sabbath or the opposite? So that's a very interesting question how the Lord puts it, So I don't know.
No, I catch you. I'm picking up what you're putting down. Let's have Sean throw it out there. Be gentle.
So what was the first thing that was sanctified? We just read it. The first thing sanctified was the Sabbath. So if a slave is not above his master, and you serve the master of the universe, and he rests on the Sabbath, what gives you the right not to? Because you're a slave, you're not above your master. So, and getting back to like Jeannie said, this is all a shadow of what's to come. We're moving through these Moedim, and if you can't keep the weekly, then you're surely going to start skipping out on the other holidays. And then when that day where the trumpet comes, we're going to know, we're going to see the signs, we're going to see things going on. We're going to go, man, this is starting to look like Egypt. And we're going to see that stuff. And we're not going to know the exact hour, but we're going to see the signs, and we're going to know this is coming because we are rehearsing, and we're seeing this cyclical pattern going on. And we're going to look backwards, which is very Hebraic, because if we look backwards, we can see where we're going. And as we look backwards and we start to see these things, that's why we teach them to our children diligently. And our children take it to the next generation, because this cyclical pattern moves on, and he's saying, I'm showing you, I'm showing you, I'm showing you. So when that time comes, you'll see the signs, and you'll go, it's coming. It's time to do what we need to do. So they can continue to say that, but when that time comes, we all know there's not going to be a rapture, and they're going to be standing there going, what's going on? And it's going to shake them, and they're going to lose their faith, and they're going to go, man, there was this crazy guy that wouldn't work on Saturdays, and what was it that he was saying? I got to remember that. So, we're not above our master, and we need to continue to keep these days and be obedient to them. So
I think it does have to do with obedience, and I think from a practical standpoint, I know that some people will say, you know what, I have to have a job in order to take care of my family. And you know what? The only job that I can get or that I'm qualified for or whatever requires me to work on Shabbat. Now, I understand that. That is the way that life works sometimes. And I would not stand here to pass judgment on that, and I wouldn't necessarily say that you should heed my advice, but I will say this. I have had, for example, a client that I know with, and I know and work with well. We work well together. We've done a lot of work with them, and they've asked me. They'll forget every once in a while, and they'll say, "Hey, we've got this event coming up that we need you to photograph," and I'll say, "Yeah, sign me up. I'm there. What do you need?" And then they'll say, "Okay, here's the date," and I'll get home and look at my calendar, and I'm like, "That's a Sabbath day," and I've committed them to do it. You know what I do? And I'm not saying that you should do this necessarily, but I go to them and I tell them, "I committed to you to do this. I'm going to do it. You will not pay me. I will not accept your money. I will do it as a work of charitable giving on my part." And they're like, "No, we can't do that." And I said, "Well, if you insist on paying me, give it to, you guys are all 501c3s. Just take the money and put it into your foundation, your charitable organization. I'll donate it. So I will do what I told you I would do, but I'm not going to accept money from you." So, and if you know what, and I have heard several people say that, it's like, you know what, if you're required to work on Shabbat, don't take the money. Give the money away. Go ahead.
Maybe if someone was in that situation, I was having a conversation with them, I would tell them pray for change.
Yeah.
True.
Do what you have to do, but pray for change, because maybe God is using this situation to test your faithfulness, and if you're in a situation with your job where you think it's just impossible not to work on Saturday, maybe He wants to take that opportunity to show you how He can make the impossible happen.
Good point. I would say to look for an opportunity to find a better situation where you didn't have to work on Shabbat, but if it was required, don't take the money.
Yeah, unless you're a surgeon or something like that, you have to. There's no.
I think that
Because
Yeshua,
life supersedes-
because Yeshua pointed out straight up,
Healing.
life is more important.
And in that vein, your family's life, the provision for them would.
Exactly.
But I would say be patient and pray for it to be able to someday observe that.
Yeah.
If
Yeah.
it is in your heart that you want to do it, and Yahweh wants you to do it, He'll make it happen.
Yeah.
You just need to be faithful and just keep praying. If you really want that to happen, I mean,
Yeah.
you just have to keep
Yeah, I was in retail for 30 years, and when I just went in and I just finally got to the point where it was like I just went in and I said, I can't work on Shabbat on Sabbath anymore. And I was, they wanted to keep me, so they worked my schedule, and and I thought it was going to be impossible. But and I've heard numerous stories of people just finally go in and say, I just can't do this anymore. I just have to have this off, and this is the reason why. And like she says, you be prayerful about it, and He knows your heart, and it's amazing. I mean, if He can drown Pharaoh's army in the sea, He could change your boss's mind.
That's true.
Jeannie?
Something I think I've come to realize more in the last 2 years than I've ever realized is
A lot.
so much of our journey is learning to rely on Him when we've been taught our whole lives to rely on ourselves, to rely on our insurance, to rely on a million other things, and that this journey on this earth is to get back to learning to rely on Him. And my prayer was for Him to show me those ways. And I was shocked really as I started really realizing how many areas of my life we rely on everything but Him.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know?
Absolutely. I had a big conversation with my boys the other day when we were talking about we've been reading through the Chronicles and the Kings, talking about how he did evil in the sight of the Lord and he did okay, and he did evil in the sight of the Lord and he did okay, and everybody was doing what was right in their own eyes, and everybody was, they had high places and Asherah and worshiping the Baalim and all this other stuff, and talking about how today most people, there are still some, but most people don't bow down to idols. They don't have little figurines or trees, or, you can talk about Christmas if you want to, but that's neither here nor there. But the realistic thing is that whatever you're relying upon for your health, well-being, safety, whatever, that's your God. And that today, it's just exactly as Jeannie said. We're relying on our money. We're relying on our insurance. We're relying on the priests over here at the hospital to save us. That struck me a couple of years ago, that these doctors and surgeons, they are priests of a religion that is taking your money, raping you on insurance, and saying that they're going to heal you. And how often do they heal you? Rarely. They just want
Isn't
your...
that putting our faith in something other than
That is
God?
putting your faith in something other than God. Now, I do think that you need to strike a balance. I think that if you get you got a busted arm, don't be an imbecile. If you break your arm, go to the doctor. He'll put a cast on it. That's just common sense. I don't think that you need to be throwing out, anything to do with medicine. I know some people who do, and I think that can cross the line into foolishness at some point. However, I digress. What we rely on so many things other than God in our day. Those are our idols. And I think that you can also see in the book of the Revelation that when God comes, like he did in Egypt, to judge the idols of Egypt, he did. He judged those idols. He judged those gods. He destroyed them and said that is not a God. He will do the same thing in our day. One of the first things he does is destroy the money, destroy the economy, destroy the financial system. That screws up everything. There's your idol wiped out right now. You got no money, you can't pay for insurance, you can't pay for a hospital, you can't pay for food, you can't pay your rent, you can't pay your car. Where's your faith now? This is what's that?
In Bitcoin.
Bitcoin.
It's interesting that outside that Wall Street building there's a golden calf.
Yeah, it's interesting that outside the Wall Street building is a golden calf. That's an absolutely insightful piece of wisdom right there.
And the symbol for the medical field is two snakes on a staff, which is actually the symbol for commerce.
Yeah. And it's interesting too is that we saw in the book of 1st and 2nd Kings that the Israelites had the tribes of Judah had actually taken the staff of Moses that had the serpents on it and worshipped it.
Yeah.
My goodness. Not that we wouldn't, but I'm just saying.
Yeah.
Please.
Just in realizing that once we come into this, the Lord isn't requiring us to be perfect in our walk.
No.
And none of us ever will be, but the fact that he gives us grace to grow and learn. So if someone's faced with that as their thing that they're trying to come into obedience with, he, as it has been said, he will guide you if you truly want that and make a way. Somehow he will do it. But in addressing the heart, whenever I hear that phrase about he knows your heart, my personal response to that is that's the number one excuse for anything, is that he knows my heart. But you look at the word, and even though he wants us to worship him with all our heart, soul, mind, and strength, he very clearly tells us our heart is evil.
He says the heart is desperately wicked.
Yes.
Messiah says he would trust himself to them because he knew what was in man.
Yeah. So our hearts are very finicky.
Mm-hmm.
And at one time we can be this way, and then a few minutes later another way. So I wouldn't encourage anyone to trust your heart, but trust the Lord.
Yeah.
And let him write on your heart.
I know that some people might use the phrase, just follow your heart. And you know what? I wouldn't throw that out entirely, because maybe they don't mean exactly what you're saying.
Right.
But in a lot of cases, they do unwittingly. And I think that there's a lesson here for us as we go into when man was created and he's being created in the image of God. What is above your heart? Your ears, your head, your intelligence, your reason, your logic, your ears. That's above your heart, and for a reason. Tracy.
Also, too, in response to that, he knows my heart. the question should be, do you know his?
That's
I
good.
think that's
Good
more
point.
important.
Sure.
Yes.
Yes, he does know everyone's heart, and yes, it is valid in some respects, because we are all trying to do our best for the most
Yeah.
part, but
And I was simply saying that sometimes when a person uses that phrase, he knows my heart, he knows that my intention is to do what he wants.
Yeah.
And I don't think that they mean it but sometimes they do, and sometimes it works that way.
well,
It's
sometimes
like,
he
he
uses
knows
an
my
excuse
heart.
to sin. That's what I'm
Yeah,
trying
no,
to
I
say.
understand. So, but yeah, when some people are like, I don't want to do what God says, he knows that I would, but I've got a good heart. That's not going to work. Grace, hold on.
That's why the Lord put in Psalms, David saying, "Search me, O God, and know my heart. Try me and know my thoughts, and lead me in the way
Test me.
everlasting."
Right.
And that's a test.
Because the Lord knows my
Shabbat
heart.
is a
And
test.
when I'm praying and I say, Lord, show me as you see me and as what you want,
Right.
not what I think might be good or whatever.
Absolutely.
And he's faithful.
Yeah, absolutely.
He's faithful. That's what he wants to do.
Absolutely. Gene?
We actually had a midrash on this subject similar to this last Friday, I think
Yeah.
it was. And it was really good because it was talking about the fact that we're to meditate on his word day and night, that we're to fill our mind with his word. And read through scripture after scripture after scripture where it talked about the heart. And basically, to sum everything up, is that our mind is to rule over our heart, and our mind is to be filled with his word. And by filling our mind with his word, we're able to rule over our heart. When we let our heart lead, and then our heart has to be circumcised, and that's by our mind ruling over our heart.
Right.
It was just really connecting a lot of things. And
Yeah, that's a great insight. Great insight. Someone else? Yeah.
Well, I think what you're talking about, a lot of times in traditional churches, Shabbat just isn't the way it should be. I mean, you've got people, what's the score on the Cowboys game, or I mean, their minds aren't even focused on God's word. And again, in Mark, what does Yeshua say? I am the Lord of the Sabbath, of Shabbat.
Mm-hmm.
I am, not football, not
Right.
anything.
Nothing else.
I
Right.
am.
Right.
And again, most of the church probably
And
doesn't do.
that's an excellent point, and I think that what I would like to point out at this time is this next question here, and I think that goes right to what he was saying, which that the Son of Man is the Lord of the Sabbath. Okay, that this is what he's talking about. How is the halakha, the way that you walk out the Shabbat, interpreted by your rabbi? As according to, how is it different from the halakha of the rabbis of Judaism?
What is halakha?
The way you walk.
The way you walk.
The way you walk a commandment. Okay. Now, what does your rabbi say? Because you know that you are supposed to be beholden to your rabbi, right? Your rabbi is Yeshua. Okay. So, what does Yeshua say about the Shabbat that is different than your traditional Jewish rabbi, ultra-Orthodox,
You can heal.
Reformed, however you want to look
You can
at it?
heal on the Sabbath.
Okay, so there's only two things that I'm aware of that he disagreed with them on the Sabbath, right? What are those two things?
Healing.
They said you cannot heal on the Sabbath.
Yeah.
He said, yes, I can. And what was the other thing?
I think rubbing the grain.
You can't pick heads of grain. That's because they believed that was work.
he also was against the traditions of man being over the traditions of God
Right,
when it came to anything with the Sabbath or
Right.
anything.
right, right.
Did he say anything about the helping an animal?
Yeah, your
Was that
neighbor's
the Sabbath
donkey
too?
fell in a ditch. Yeah, he was
So,
using
that
that in
being
he used that as a parable to say this is why I'm going to heal this person.
Okay.
Because if you see, which of you seeing,
Yeah.
your own donkey falling into a ditch are not going to get it out of there? Of course you are. And so therefore it is good to do good on the Sabbath. And I am
Ruling over the animals.
and ruling over the animals. Yeah, it all ties
Shabbat
together.
morning comes and 6:30 we're out milking the cow, or out feeding the sheep, or out feeding the chickens, or you got, they have to be taken care of.
Sure, sure, absolutely,
Doesn't change.
absolutely. So, the Torah definition of what thou shalt do and what thou shalt not do, just from a real practical standpoint regarding Sabbath, what is that?
Commanded to gather.
Okay, you're commanded to have a convocation, mikra. You were commanded, and I think that you know, a lot of times we hear our brothers and sisters in traditional Christianity say, "Thou shalt not forsaking," you know, the gathering together of yourselves. There's that, you know. So definitely getting together. That's a great idea.
I think the most important part is also not for yourself, but also for other people. Do not let other people work for you.
Yes.
Because not animals or employees or
That's
whatever
what he
it
says,
is.
right. And I think that many of us, you know, who are new to it and we're kind of trying to figure it out, it's like, well, I'm not going to work, but I got no problem going down to the store and making that person work for me. Well, that person who, whether it's your server at a restaurant or the person helping you at line, they are working and they are your servant and you are paying them to do that. So and that's why Nehemiah and Ezra talked about closing the gates, because they were directly making a connection between, you know, you conducting transactions on the Sabbath to making people work. I don't think they were coming up with new commandments. They were coming up with valid interpretations of the commandment to fit what was happening in the congregation. They were engaged in commerce. Did you have something?
Well, I think that it's, I mean, with that in mind, buying, selling, all those things, the gathering, you know, it talks about the Sabbath being the queen of the week. I mean, it's something that you look forward to. Mm-hmm. And to look forward to something means that you prepare for it, so you have to make preparation. You have to, you know, I mean, us coming down here this weekend, I had to go, okay, where are we going to gather? We have to gather someplace. So we're blessed that you're here and we're able to gather. And that frees us up so that we can do tomorrow. But tomorrow we don't buy gas, we don't buy food, so we have to make preparations for that. Mm-hmm. So in that thinking, it's just like everything else. God wants a relationship with us, that we consider Him and His ways in everything we do, from the things we put in our mouth, and that's our halakha. That's how we walk. How are we going to walk out our days and be? And it always takes me back to Fiddler on the Roof, because he's just talking to God all the time. Why are you doing this to me? And that's the relationship He wants us to have. Everything that we say and the way that we conduct ourselves, we're running it through Him first. Is this how He has put His name on me? I am taking on His character. Is this how I want to be a sign to the nations and portray? Because to me, using God's name in vain isn't saying that word. Right. To me, it's proclaiming this. I serve the King, and yet I walk contrary to that, and the nations observe me in that. That is using His name in vain.
That is you bringing shame to His name.
Yeah. Well,
yeah, absolutely.
If it's a rehearsal for the millennium, who were the ones that were prepared? Exactly. Well, if you don't prepare for it, right, you're not doing the rehearsal the way you're supposed to.
Well, that's why the New Testament, in several occasions, talks about it the day of preparation, whether it's the 14th of the month for Passover, or whether it's the day, you know, before the Shabbat. That's
the oil lamps filled.
The oil and the lamps, yeah, absolutely. Tracy?
I was just going to say, she had mentioned that earlier, and that's what this is, a picture of prepping for that. And it's all about how much of this word do you have in you? Because just mirroring the manna, picking up the manna, having enough for 6 days to last you on that seventh day, because there's not going to be any more on that at that point. Right. Whatever you have in your vessel is what you have. Right. And that's not something you can share with someone else necessarily, especially at that point.
Sure, you know? Sure. Absolutely.
And if you can't, and just like He was testing them in the wilderness, gathering the manna to see if they were walking His Torah or not. And you can't stop and do this and pick up manna in the flesh, do this fleshy thing. How are you going to be able to keep the Torah?
Yeah, good point. Was someone else over there? Yes, Daryl.
You know, I think the Shabbat, I mean, if you think about why did God even create man? I mean, what do you think God really needed to create man? He could survive nicely without us. So obviously it's about relationship. He wanted a relationship. And so I think that when you understand that the Shabbat is a Moedim, a set-aside time, when you can come together with your Creator to develop a relationship. And through that relationship, you start to understand that you know your responsibility in that relationship, that he is the king, and our part of our responsibility is to worship him, because he wants to be worshiped in a very specific way. And so I think that's important to understand, that it's about relationship and it's about obedience.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
you know, that through that relationship you learn his kingdom, you learn about his ways, and that through that you understand that he is the king who needs to be worshiped by you and praised by you.
Yeah.
That's a big part of this whole deal.
Sure. Good insight. Mike?
I think it's interesting too in Exodus 31. It relates this sanctification that you mentioned in Genesis 2, but he's saying that these people should guard this Sabbath because it's a covenant between him and them. And it says that you may know that I am Yehovah that does sanctify you.
Yeah.
So observing that Sabbath, he's setting you apart as well. And it goes on to talk about the people that break that covenant, and it says it's kind of interesting, the order, but it says that if you defile the Sabbath, you shall be put to death. And then it talks about being cut off. So secondly, you're cut off. But the word cut off, when you look at the word picture, it's to cover the Most High's covenant, to conceal it.
Interesting.
You need to do away with the law.
I think that's a good way to put it. Yeah. Interesting. Tracy?
Well, I had some other insight about creation week and the Sabbath. that I thought
Please.
was pretty interesting. First thing is, I think it's interesting that he makes a place for man. He said in verse 1 here, chapter 2, it says the heavens and the earth were finished and all their hosts, and then he rested. So he made everything for man. And then after they make the tabernacle according to his instruction, Exodus 39:32 says, thus all the work of the tabernacle of the tent of the congregation was finished. And that's the same word, finished. And the children of Israel did according to all that Yehovah commanded Moses. So then they made him a place to dwell. And I think that's kind of a neat picture, because that's a picture of the heavenlies and a larger picture spiritually of the body, that we're making a place for him to dwell.
Yeah.
So that he can come and Shabbat with us in the 7,000th year.
Yes.
Also, if you go to, I won't go through it all because it'd probably be too long, but if you go to Genesis 8 and 9, chapter 8 and 9, after the Noah flood, it mirrors creation week. You've got waters above, you've got the Spirit moving on the waters, you've got the waters above, the waters below ceasing, you've got the olive branch, the trees. I started putting a document together I was going to bring in and give, but I didn't finish it. But
Well, that's interesting that you mentioned that, because I actually, I don't know if, did any of you guys actually watch the little videos by Rabbi David Foreman?
yeah.
He had a most amazing video that he put out regarding the tabernacle, the Mishkan, being like a dual image of creation. That he showed some really stunning connections between the Mishkan being raised up and even the elements of the Mishkan. With the cherubim and the separation. It was really, really interesting about how the raising up of the Mishkan was directly related to the 6 days of creation, and that God was creating a space for man to dwell, and that man is now creating a space for God to dwell, and it was a reciprocal relationship. Very, very interesting.
It would appear that tree of life was like in the center, in the midst of it all. It's what the ark would be, and the cherubim guarding on the curtains, the ark.
Yeah, that was all tied in.
I was going to say that when they set up the tabernacle, that was on New Moon Day, that wasn't on the Sabbath. And also in the water seas, that was on New Moon Day. I thought
Yeah, I think that maybe in a similar video, might have been in the same video, Rabbi Foreman also talked about Noah and his ark, and how that was also connected in the same way. I thought that was very interesting.
Just an idea about a place for God to dwell in, like the tabernacle. If, looking at the days of creation, the sin hadn't occurred yet. So it was like he was creating a place for him to come and dwell with us on the earth. And on the seventh day, then he was resting from his creation of his temple on the earth, and that's when he came and resided with them until the sin happened, and he couldn't stay in the same place with us anymore till they built the tabernacle according to his specifications. So it was like an inauguration for this sacred space, and the Sabbath was. Interesting.
Yeah. Does anyone have any other comments that you want to make in regard to the Shabbat? I think we've did a pretty good job on that, Tracy.
Oh, at that Noah account at the end is when he gives the covenant of the rainbow, the 7 colors, and there's all the 7 verbiage in there, so it's matching up. The only thing I couldn't see that was not in that account, maybe it is I'm missing it, but is the light in the beginning and the fish. But I see everything else there. I don't know what that is.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah, because they don't talk about the sea life at all, because it's kind of like...
Yeah, well, I was talking with somebody, I don't remember who it was, maybe it was last week, about whether the sea life lived through the flood, and I would have to say, well, most likely a lot of it did, but there's certainly a great possibility because of the disruption of the...
Well, you showed us that creature that had been found.
Yes.
That's where we were talking
yeah,
about.
that's right. I think that's right. But I thought, if the earth was breaking open underneath and spewing forth waters from underneath, that it might have created a lot of silt, and that can kill the fish. It screws with the oxygen in the water. But I mean, if the whole thing is covered with water, I'm sure that there are pockets of clean fresh water. So yeah, I'm sure that probably many sea creatures did die during the flood, but probably a decent portion survived. It wouldn't take much, for them to start teeming forth with life again. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there's plenty to eat. That's true.
And he tells them to go and be fruitful and multiply. Same exact verbiage as he tells them here.
Yeah.
The only difference is now he says you can eat meat. So
Yeah.
we were vegetarians at this point in the creation.
Don't tell John that.
Well, he's gone.
He's behind you. I'm playing.
John's got it right.
He certainly could. Now, interesting question here. Why does it say what this interesting verbiage regarding in verse 4 the genealogical annals of the heaven and the earth? How do you interpret that? These are the genealogical records of the heavens and the earth when they were created. The genealogical records of what? The planet?
Also says birthings or births.
I'm sorry?
That's one interpretation or one translation. It also says can mean birthings or births.
Oh, okay. Yeah,
or
right.
Cycles. I heard one person said it as well.
Yeah, I've heard birthing and cycles. So the birthing and cycles of what? That's my question. Are we talking about that these are the birthing or cycles of the heavens and the earth? Or is this like saying that this is in relation to the creatures that I've created on this planet? This is how it all started? I mean, what is the opinion?
What's the Hebrew? Because mine just says this is an account.
Yeah, the Hebrew... Does anyone have that real quick? Do you see that?
So to me, mine sounds like it's a summary line.
That word is the same word that we see in Genesis 5:1, and these are the generations of Adam.
Yeah,
It's the same word.
Yeah, it actually does, the toldot.
Generation.
Yeah. Or toledah, the root being toldot. Descendants, the results, the proceedings, the generations, genealogies, account of men and their descendants, family, history, birth. So, I mean, what is it a record of? The birth of what? Of the universe? Of the heavens? Is this telling us this is going to be a history of mankind on this planet? What do you think is implied here? You're silent on this issue. You got an idea?
Yeah, there are two ideas. One is indeed it could be for the birthing of how everything came to be, even in a linear fashion for, of course, the earth, and then we have life being created, etc., etc. So it could mean like that, when there's a linear step to it, from one place to the other. And I also heard there are like 7 parts of the creation of all this. Not only the 7 days, but there actually were cycles to get to a perfect point. But that goes a little bit of weird idea.
Okay.
But I think even if the weird part is even when we see in chapter 2, after we talk about the Sabbath, everything has been created, but man now is being really created.
Yeah,
So
that's an interesting. The rabbis in Judaism have
is that a cycle?
Something that that kind of puzzles them a little bit. Why, and I think that the most obvious thing that maybe just look at it on its face, and you don't have to get yourself wrapped around the axle about it. It's like, well, let me just go into some detail here because I think the details will provide you some additional information that's of spiritual significance, and not necessarily. I'm going on to a different topic now. Do you see what I'm saying? I think that to me, looking at it in its simplest sense makes a lot of sense. And I'm not saying you couldn't pull out some interesting spiritual significance to that, but I don't think there's any reason to go on to like we're talking about a new subject now. Just my interpretation or my idea, my opinion. Sean, did you have something?
Well, in my thought, it's an account of a creation account that brings validity to the creator of the universe, and it almost sets up like a suzerain treaty that we see when they come out of Egypt, and he starts to address the Hebrew nation in a way that's, I'm the God that delivered you out of Egypt, so now it's, I am the sovereign, you are my subjects, these are the rules to my kingdom. So in that same way that treaty is represented in Exodus, this almost is the same way. I am the God who created the universe. I'm the one that created you. Therefore, the servitude goes to me. So it's almost like a treaty, an early treaty. Later on, they developed different, but that's kind of the way I see it. He's proclaiming his kingship.
Sure.
Over his creation.
It's a good way to look at it. It's good insight. What do you think about the fact that this is the first place where it begins to use his ineffable tetragrammaton in connection with Elohim, and this is the first place in the Bible where you see Yehovah Elohim? Why did it just before say God did this and God did that and God did this and God did that? And now all of a sudden it says Yehovah Elohim. What is this? Is there any significance to that, or is it just happenstance that it just kind of pops out here?
Where does it say?
In verse 6, excuse me. No, 5. Well, 4 is actually, 4, and then 5 it's repeated again. And in fact, it starts doing it all over the place. All of a sudden now it's not just saying God, it's saying Yehovah Elohim. Repeatedly, Yehovah Elohim, Yehovah Elohim. What do you know about what does Yehovah mean? Have you ever listened to any of the rabbinic teachings or done any word studies on the Tetragrammaton and maybe what is the meaning of this thing? What is the root of it?
I used to know. Yud is the hand.
It's revealing himself.
Okay, yeah, Yud is the hand, and Hey is the breath or the spirit.
Vav is the nail.
Vav is the nail, and another spirit. So what do you think of that word picture? Tracy?
Well, I saw a cool picture in it itself. If you look at the ancient pictographs, you see the hand, and then you see a man, and you see a stick that's going like this. It's 2 and then 1, and then you see another man. So you know the prophecy in Ezekiel of the 2 houses coming together. It's Yahweh's hand, Judah, the two sticks coming together as one, and Ephraim.
That's an interesting word picture.
There's
Sure.
a pretty cool
Sure.
word picture there.
Yeah.
That he
So-
would put Israel, his people, in his name. I think that that's amazing.
Good idea. Annie?
Well, I think it's also I am who I am. That's represented in
Right.
self-sufficient, and I.
Right. I think that's the traditional rabbinic idea that they would teach is regarding his name is that I am, I was, and I will be. That's it.
And that's
I
what
am.
Messiah we see in the book of Revelation is that the one who was and who is and is coming. I think
Right.
that envelops that.
Right. Absolutely. And so why, at this point in the narrative, does it suddenly say, now what are the attributes? So you've heard about these attributes of these names, right? That God denotes one thing and Yehovah denotes another?
Well, I was going to say, why is it in this context? I mean, he talks about the birthings of the heavens and the earth, like how they came to be, and then he reveals that he has no beginning and no end.
Good insight there, yeah. I like that. Yeah, I think that's a good insight. And you've probably heard in relation to the teachings from a lot of people that, they've done word studies throughout the Torah and the prophets and the writings regarding the Yud He Vav He is most often associated with God's attributes of mercy. And that Elohim is most often associated with God's attributes of justice. Now that is a word picture in itself where he is showing you when he creates everything, his authority and his power and his judgment. I am God, I do these things. Now when he starts talking about man, he starts talking about Yehovah Elohim, balancing justice and mercy. Being able to balance justice and mercy is an attribute that only God has. Humans are notoriously horrible at balancing justice and mercy. That is an attribute that only God can really demonstrate. He knows when the right time is to give somebody a spanking. And he knows when the right time is to show someone mercy. And you know what? Maybe we think that person doesn't deserve mercy. They need to be spanked. But he knows exactly when the heart is right to correct and when to be merciful and gentle.
We don't like it when we get disciplined sometimes.
Yeah. Sean?
Well, I think that's also represented in the Mashiach too, because he came as Ben Yosef, as a suffering servant, and he will come again as Ben David,
Right.
the judging king.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think those are again, it's showing the divinity of Yeshua as well. To talk about how he is just like the Father, that he balances mercy and justice perfectly, which when we obviously don't do that very well. I think that we're going to have to stop here. Obviously, and I'll probably keep repeating this, there's so much that we just can't possibly see here, and even if we did, it would take us forever. Good stuff, though.
Yeah.
Tremendously powerful stuff. And I think, unfortunately, I'm kind of bummed because I wanted to talk about the breath of the Spirit of life and the human and the parts that he's composed of and how this is a spiritual picture of God. It's tremendously powerful stuff, but unfortunately it's going to have to wait for 2 weeks.
Right.
Because we're going to be, doing Shavuot next time. And anyway, there we go. Please throw out something, one more thing. The final word goes to you.
When we started, Trace and I were talking about how we were trying to connect the fifth day of creation with birds and fish to trumpets. And listening to you guys all talk, and this whole idea of the covenant and the Sabbath, and that keeps coming up. And I'm probably going to botch this terribly, but I'm thinking maybe the reason why we're really having trouble with this Feast of Trumpets and the fish and bird thing and making the connections, maybe because we're so close to it. And maybe that there's something reflected in these birds and fish in the way he's bringing his people back to him right now, like us, like what's happened to us in the last several years. Because you have birds and fish who are a little bit different from land animals, and that they do these migrations and these schools, and you see those flocks of birds, and they move from one place to another. We were just listening to Melissa today. They migrate for provision and protection, so they don't freeze to death, so they can find food. And it was almost like an alarm trumpet. An alarm went off in us a few years ago that said, you are not where you need to be for provision and protection. That this is coming, and I need you to move. Not physically so much. I think at first a lot of us got scared and thought it was physical and wanted to stock our pantries and move out, you know. But spiritually, he needed to move us to a new place. And this thing in Isaiah 56, he talks about gathering his people, like the swarms of the birds and the fish, and moving them into a protected...
and fishers too.
Right. Into a protected place. And in this Isaiah 56, from 6 to 8, he talks about joining not just Israel, but Gentiles, I hate to use that word, but other people, bringing them to him. He says his servants, and he defines his servants as those who keep from profaning the Sabbath and hold fast his covenant. He says, those I will bring to my holy mountain. I will gather the dispersed of Israel, and then he even adds, yet others I will gather to them, to those already gathered. So it's almost like he's multiplying and gathering. So I picture that big flock of birds. I don't know if you saw that video on Facebook, but they're just doing this thing in the evening
And the fish
sky.
do that too under the
Yeah,
water.
they do.
And maybe that's what's happening to us, is we're being moved, not just like birds and fish and their internal clocks that God gave them, but he gave us something internal that's extra special, connected to his spirit, that's moving us.
And if
where
you
he needs
consider
us
that
to
this
be.
day 5 comes after day 4, which is a representation of the Messiah coming in the flesh, the sun, the moon for light, the parable of the light was in the beginning. This happened after he came and rose, so that would be the 5th day moving into what's...
Yeah, that's interesting, and I'm going to throw out one more thing. I apologize, just because it's directly related to what she's talking about, and it just happened yesterday, last night, when I was studying with the children at the very end of the book of 2 Kings. A most curious thing occurs to where this whole time we've been reading about everyone seems to be doing what is right in their own eyes, and this king is evil and does evil in the eyes of Yehovah and follows after the sins of Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, and making Israel sin. And then we get a good king who, he tries to restore the temple, he strengthens the walls, he maybe knocks down a few Asherah and cleans up some of the stuff and maybe kills a few prophets of Baal, but then we're back to, an evil king again. Well, this thing seems to culminate because the last 2 kings, one of them was Hezekiah and the other one was Josiah, was kings that were righteous and really seemed to, say he didn't sway one way or the other. But the most curious thing, Jeconiah finds a copy of the Torah at the end of 2 Kings. And they're treating it like this is Indiana Jones and the Raiders of the Lost Ark type of stuff. It's like they start reading this book and they're like, what in the world? And I'm asking myself and I'm asking the kids, and they're kind of puzzled too. They're like, well, what have they been doing this whole time? I think they were doing what was in their own hearts. Maybe they weren't guarding it, because all of a sudden we find a copy of the Torah and he reads it out loud and was like, we haven't done any of this stuff. We're in serious trouble. And he calls out to Yehovah and he rips his clothes and he's on his face and he's saying, go. And this female prophet, it's the first time we've seen a female prophet in the books of the 1st and 2nd Kings, shows up and says, here's what Yehovah says. It's too late. I am bringing a tremendous and powerful judgment on this place. I will destroy everything and I'll wipe that bowl and turn it upside down. Jerusalem will be emptied of inhabitants. However, I have heard your cries to me, and I see that your heart is repentance. What I will do is I'm going to take your life. You will die before this great tragedy comes, so that you will not have to see it with your own eyes. And I thought, man, that is a powerful, powerful prophetic picture there.
Yes.
That over the last 2,000 years, and the kids didn't know anything about Catholicism and how the whole thing was completely screwed up. But I started talking about the history of Christianity has been each man doing what is right in his own eyes, being led by a group of blind men who, nobody can read the scriptures in their own language, and then all of a sudden they discover, because Martin Luther and the printing press comes along, and suddenly we're opening up our Bibles going, this does not say what you've been telling us it says.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden somebody finds a copy of the Torah, which has just happened most recently, for us at least, but I think you can maybe date it back to not very long ago.
Right.
So in the last days, here we are finding a copy of the Torah, trying to follow it. Now, I'm not saying God's going to kill us all so that we won't have to see the evil that He's about to bring on the world. But you know what? It's an interesting illusion, and I think it's very, very curious parallels. Anyway, sorry to bring that down to you. I'm bringing it down off the mountain. This is good. Anyway, let's pray.